just you get to choose. Like here's the scenario. The environment gives us something which can be perceived as negative, can be perceived as not working, can be perceived as problematic. The world's ending. But we get to choose to see it like that, or we get to choose to see it as an opportunity.
So clearly that it's my responsibility now to do that for other people. If I have information and, other people's success is my success and vice versa.
Because you know what? Like the challenges or the roadblocks are the journey themselves.
There's no big things. It's all little things compounding on top of each other. I'd like to welcome Coach Jon Zieve to another episode of Truth Seekers. Welcome, Coach.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. I believe we're going to start out with a question on today's episode that we're going to navigate and possibly get some new clarity with and for. And if I have this right, maybe you can confirm, but we want to answer the question, do you feel like you do not have the time to do either what you love or what you're best at? Is that right? Is that what we're answering today?
Yeah, I think it's a good question.
So maybe before we jump in, can you describe how do we come up with that question? Why is that a question that would be valuable for us to address today?
Well, in my experience as a coach and with myself, I find this is a real challenge for people. They feel that they have to be doing things that they kind of know, well, I really probably shouldn't be doing this. I should have someone else do it, but I still do it.
Okay.
And they don't really have the clarity to figure out how to stop doing it. And then they complain about lacking focus and what they really want. And so there's this conflict between, I don't really have the clarity about what I really want, how to do that. And I feel like I have to do some things that I don't really want to do, but I do them anyways. So has that ever come up in coaching calls with your clients?
Yeah, I'm trying to maybe put a real life example into this scenario. So maybe you can critique this. So I'm coaching a new younger manager who is moving up the chain, just got promoted, and finds herself overwhelmed with all the activities that she feels like she has to be doing, when in reality probably could be delegating some of those things. So one thing we just recently dealt with was, I feel like I do it like my way is the best way. I do it the best and I can't trust other people to do it. Is that a good example?
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah. So the perception is I don't trust others to do it as good or better than me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the question is that the truth? Or is that a perception based on some more fool's choices that we make that are sometimes unconscious?
How do we know? How do we know that's whether or not that's the truth or just our perception?
We have to ask ourselves these tough questions. So one question you can ask is, do I believe that I can't do this and that? So again, the fool's choice is, I believe that if I'm honest about myself and what I want and how I express myself, that I'm going to lose something. I'm going to lose a friend, or I'm going to have a reaction by someone that I don't like. That's the fool's choice. Why is it a fool's choice? Feedback from you?
Because it's our perception that we have to have one or the other when we can have both. We can, when we say what we want and we don't want, we can, it allows our brain to start solving for that problem.
Yeah. So what is it in your experience? What is it that we feel in our bodies that causes us to think, oh, I can't really have that, so I'm going to stay on this side and I'm not going to even want it? What is that feeling we feel?
Yeah, it's usually some barrier of a strong emotion is how I would describe that. And there's some specific ones that you might be getting at.
What are those? What are those emotions that come up?
Yeah, I would say it's a lot of guilt or fear or shame or any combination of the three of those things.
That's it. You got it. So the listeners can be asking themselves, if you have a known challenge with delegating, you don't have enough time to do what you really want to do, you don't have the focus that you want, and you think, yeah, I can do it better than them, I'm not even going to bother. Then ask yourself, do I feel any kind of guilt and shame that I'm not doing what I know I should be doing?
Before we continue, before we answer that, and before we dive deeper, I just want to make an observation. You know, we've done a couple of these episodes together. What I've noticed about you is that your strategy and technique is centered around asking yourself questions.
Yeah.
And I might want to just like take a little side route real quick and ask you about that, because it sounds like you've been probably doing it for so long that it's just a practice that you do now. But I wouldn't say that's like a very common thing. And for somebody who might be curious about how they can do this more themselves, you know, maybe if you could share more about that.
That is my practice. I learned it a long time ago. If you ask enough questions to yourself, you will get all the answers you need. And that doesn't mean you don't need a coach, because a coach might, and this is what I'm told quite a bit by the people that I coach, is the right questions to ask.
You do it every day. You practice it, right? So you can see more.
So it is kind of my gift, is I know the right questions to ask. And then, but in order for someone to practice overcoming these fool's choices, they need to start their own practice. Because eventually, you don't want to have a coach forever. You hire a coach for a specific thing, and there's a gap between where you are and where you want to be. And sometimes that gap moves and you can continue to go after something else. But I think it's best to be responsible for knowing how to do this yourself and learning that, so you don't have to have a coach forever.
And at its base purpose, you're asking yourself the question because you know the answer. Is that true? Because some people just
you're the only one that knows the right answer for you. I can tell you what my perception is, but I'm not you. And to me, it all comes back to, what does your heart feel? What is your intuition telling you?
And that's the key, because I think when we think that we don't have the answer, we're skipping over something that we've already made an assumption on or a story about that is blocking us from knowing that thing. But we know it. And to your point, if you ask and keep asking, keep picking at it, you'll get to the truth of it. Is that right?
Yeah. So typically, if someone does not trust their heart or their inner voice or their intuition or their gut, whatever you want to call it, it's because they feel guilt and shame for not trusting it in the past. Or they're afraid because the voice is telling them to do something they're afraid to do.
Say that last part again, because I think that's the key to this whole episode here about the past.
So I can, I'll just tell you my little story. I was in college and I felt a very strong sense that I need to be on a certain path. I need to follow my passion, my purpose. And I was afraid. I felt fear big time, because I would be kind of doing something that was very different. I would be having to answer questions. Well, why are you doing this? I would be perceived as, this is crazy, right? You can relate to this.
Oh yeah.
And that's scary. So you have two choices at that point. You can settle and say, yeah, you know what? I don't want to deal with that. I'll just kind of compromise. Or you go for it. And it could be 30 years later. So I compromised at that point. I was maybe 20. But I felt guilt and shame about it. And it created I wasn't able to trust my intuition until I forgave myself for not trusting it.
So
That's
what do
a
you
big
mean by
part of getting the right answers. You got to forgive yourself for not trusting it.
so? What do you mean by feeling guilt and shame about it? Because I don't want to skip over that too. How do you know? How do you know you're feeling guilt and shame about something?
Well, you ask yourself, why am I not trusting myself? Why am I not trusting my intuition or my gut? It's because you've made a decision where you went against it. So you know what's right and wrong, and you feel guilt and shame when you do that.
And those are two very strong emotions that when you feel them, it's almost like it overtakes your body, right? There's like a flush that goes through and you feel like exposed or very vulnerable. And it's a very impactful, like it sits in your body. Would you say that? Would you agree with
Yeah,
that?
and you kind of punish yourself for it.
Hmm. Yeah. All
And
right.
that doesn't help. Punishment is not going to help you. You might think it is, but it's not. So the only way is through forgiveness.
Hmm.
And you have to forgive yourself. You can't have someone else forgive you. You might think you want that from other people, but that's not going to unlock you. Forgiving yourself is what unlocks you
Because we're usually the hardest on ourselves, right?
all the time.
Yeah.
We sabotage ourselves because we feel guilt and shame. That's the pattern, the circle that we go through.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for drilling down on that and taking a little detour. And one last thing before we get back to the conversation. For those watching on our YouTube channel, I just want to share the screen and show, this allowed me to see what you were talking about and describing a while back. And I'm going back more than a few months. This is from a book, right? Levels of Consciousness by David R. Hawkins.
The book is called Power versus Force.
Okay.
And this chart on the right is the chart in the book. What I did is I kind of created a PowerPoint slide where on the left I share what I've experienced as if you love, I put down the word accept, but I've since evolved to if you love these emotions that you don't like on the lower part of the slide, if you love them, they turn into the polar opposite emotion.
Mm.
But
And
a
for
lot
those,
of us, we don't know about loving these things. We think, nah, that's bad. Anger's bad, right?
yeah. So for those that can't see visually, that might just be listening on a different platform. It's some of these
Oh,
negative
right.
emotions, some of these negative emotions that are on would you say the bottom half of this pyramid or triangle that are labeled as force, they pull us down, are shame, guilt, apathy, grief, fear, desire, and anger,
And pride.
and pride. Okay.
Yeah, those are frequencies that if we're stuck in them, no matter what we try to do, we are going to go from either inaction to hyperactivity and back and forth. Because
Like a freeze.
we're in this cycle of using force to get what we want.
Mm.
And we are completely unconscious of it. We can be saying something to someone, and if we're in those frequencies of shame, guilt, apathy, grief, fear, anger, pride, desire, they're going to feel like, wow, you're pretty angry. And we're like, no, I'm not. No, you are, because they feel it. They feel the frequency.
Yeah.
So the way for us to get into the power, to really be in our full power, is to make sure we're not holding on to these lower frequencies because we're afraid of feeling them,
Hmm.
which comes back to the fool's choice, right? The fool's choice is, if you're honest, then you can have everything you want. But we believe if you're honest, you're going to lose friends. That's the fool's choice. But the way to refute it is to say, no, I'm going to be honest and I'm going to get everything I want. So it starts with your emotions. If I'm honest about how I feel, I don't project that onto other people, then I'm going to be trustworthy because I'm being honest about how I feel and I'm not blaming anyone for how I feel.
Hmm.
I'm going to deal with it.
Yeah, total 100% ownership of the way that I feel.
Exactly.
And I might add, as we start to navigate back to our original discussion here, I've discovered in my practice, the more that I want to grow myself personally, professionally, financially, these things come up as like they're the gifts, right? They're the challenges that in the moment I don't want to experience, but they're the very things, like it's like the universe is showing me, okay, well, you got to solve this first before you can get there. All right, great. Work on that. And it's internal, right? It's all internal, emotionally driven. Okay, solve that. And then, I want something else. So I pursue that. And then the universe, okay, you got to solve this first here. Remember this? You forgot about this. This is in your past. It's locked up. So this is constant reminder for high achieving people that this is also a practice. And as you get better at it, you can shorten that length of time it takes to overcome it. And then all of a sudden you're higher up on that pyramid, right? You're operating in that level of if the initial one was force, this would be power, right? You're in your power.
Right.
Accurately depicted.
And we really are afraid to be in our power. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is about, what are we afraid of? We think we're afraid of being inadequate, but we're really afraid of our power. And
Okay.
having people that feel insecure around us and we're in our power, we kind of shrink, and we don't want anyone to feel bad if they're not in their power. But that's not the way to help someone feel good. It's to be in our full power, and then we give permission to them to be in their full power. That's how we help people.
But there's an affirmation in one of my yoga video practices. I think just yesterday it said, "My confidence inspires people."
Yeah, that's
That's
great.
what that's about, right? So they see others in their power, and you're like, "Oh, well, if they can do it, then I can do it."
Right. And
Yeah.
powerful, not using force.
Right.
Right. It's using
Right.
higher emotions like love and gratitude and appreciation and courage. Those are the higher frequencies that give us the power.
Mm. All right, so tie this all back to our initial conversation of like delegating, right? We're going up, my example of this manager going up the chain, more responsibilities, and all of a sudden experiences this crossroads, right? When nobody can do it better than me. And she has this perception of lack of trust of teammates here. So where do we go from there?
We start those questions. We ask
Right.
the right questions, which would be, why don't you trust your teammates, or could even be a subordinate? Why don't you trust them? And see what the answer is. And then I would follow up with another question. Well, why do you feel that way? Because typically they'll say, well, in the past, I've asked them to do something and they didn't do it the way I said they should, or they took too much time. And if you ask enough questions, they will eventually get to, well, I'm afraid if I really tell them what I want from them, they're going to quit.
Mm.
And that's when you start to get the truth. And that's why they're not delegating, because they don't want them to quit.
Yeah.
Why is that? And if you really ask the tough questions to yourself, you'll get things like, well, I get really angry if they don't do what I want them to do, and they don't like that. Oh, so now you've identified that you're not dealing with your own anger. So let's create an action plan to deal with your own anger, So that when you ask someone to do something, you're asking with compassion. And you ask them what they think and how they think they can do the job and what they can do to bring to it that you don't have. So it becomes their idea and they own it and they actually love it. Like you're helping them love their job more because you're asking them to do more.
Mm.
So it's a perspective, but if we're unconscious about the feelings that we have that we don't deal with, typically it's things like anger, rage, resentment. Those are the kind of, and guilt and shame and fear. Those are all the emotions that sometimes we don't deal with well.
And then so to pull these points together, the anger, which might be suppressed, right? That sometimes it's not always expressed.
Exactly.
But people can feel it. So it's the frequency that you're dealing on that. So unless you address the anger, you'll continue operating on that frequency. So to get to that level of compassion where you're inspiring your teammates to love their positions and love what they do, you'll just keep getting the same results until you do the work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's questions, forgiving yourself, and then literally loving the feelings that you're afraid to feel in your heart.
Which we will save either for another episode or come get some coaching, right? That's what we do. That's how we practice every day. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Coach, any final thoughts here? This is a good one. Thank you for bearing with me as we took the detour, but I think we got to another level of understanding this that is going to be helpful for people here.
Yeah, I would just encourage questions that come from this. Please share what those questions are so that we can follow up and provide more value.
Coach Z, thanks for another riveting episode. I really appreciate this one. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Coach.
Thank you for watching another episode of Truth Seekers. We appreciate your interaction. So please comment, like, subscribe to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want more, check out some of our links. Links to our masterclass, The Achiever's Mindset, and come join our LinkedIn group. And what do you want to see more of? Remember, we're here to share the simple secrets of successful. So help us do that. What do you want to see? What do you want to see more of? Thanks, and see you again next time.